The name of the new chapter we are going to study is Socialism in Europe and French Revolution. So the age of social change. In countries like Europe and Asia and also in many parts of the world, including the continents Europe and Asia, new ideas about the individual rights who control social power they began to be discussed. Development in the colonies, they in turn reshaped these ideas of societal change. So, the 19th century was the age of individualism, 20th and 21st centuries are the age of socialism. Not everyone in the Europe wanted a complete transformation of the society. Responses varied from those who accepted that some change was necessary, but they wished for a gradual shift, to those who wanted to restructure the society radically. So, out of all the people, some were conservatives, some were liberals, and some were radicals. Liberals wanted a nation which tolerated all the religions. Liberals also opposed the uncontrolled powers of dynastic rulers. They wanted to safeguard the rights of the individuals against the governments. They also argued for a representative, elected parliamentary government, subjected to the laws interpreted by a well-trained judiciary, which was independent of the rulers and officials. Radicals wanted a nation in which the government was based on the majority of country's population. Many people supported women's suffragette movements. Unlike the liberals, they opposed the privileges of great landowners and wealthy factory owners. They were not against the existence of private property, but they disliked the concentration of the property in the hands of few. Conservatives were opposed to the radicals and liberals. After the French Revolution, even the conservatives opened their minds to the need for change. So earlier in the 18th century, conservatives generally opposed the idea of change. But by the 19th century, they accepted that some change was inevitable, but believed that past has to be respected and change had to be brought through a slow process. So Europe after Napoleon, the different viewpoints on the government were introduced after the Napoleonic era, and they were liberals, radicals and conservatives. So in this image we see that liberals used to say, oh perhaps a bit but gradually, and radicals used to say we need a change, a direction right now, and the conservative people used to say no government meddling. The free market is automatically self-correcting. Industrial society and social change. There was a time when new cities came up, new industrialized regions developed, railways expanded, and then the Industrial Revolution occurred. So this industrialization, it brought men, women and children to the factories. Work hours were long and wages were very poor. Unemployment was common, particularly during the times of low demand for industrial goods. Housing and sanitation were problems because the towns were growing very rapidly. Then the liberals and radicals, they searched a solution for these issues. In this image we see the industry and people working there. Working men and women who wanted changes in the world, they rallied around liberal and radical groups. Coming of socialism to Europe. By the mid-19th century in Europe, socialism was a well-known body of ideas which attracted attention. Socialist people were against the private property and they saw it as a root of all the social ills of all the time. Socialists had different visions for the future. Some believed in the idea of cooperatives. Socialists felt that cooperatives could not be built on a wide scale only through individual initiative. They demanded that government should encourage the cooperatives. In France, Louis Blanc, from the year 1813 to 1882, he wanted the government to encourage the cooperatives and replace the capitalist enterprises. And these cooperatives were to be associations of people who produced goods together and divided the profits according to the work done by the members. Support for socialism. Workers in the England and Germany, they began forming associations to fight for better living and working conditions. They set up the funds to help the members in the time of distress and demanded a reduction of working hours and the right to vote. By the year 1905, socialists and trade unionists, they formed a Labour Party in Britain and a Socialist Party in France. But till 1914, socialists never succeeded in forming a government. Russian Revolution. Socialists took over the government in Russia through the October Revolution of year 1917, the fall of the monarchy in February 1917, and the events of October are normally known as Russian Revolution. So in this image we see the army fighting and then the fall of the monarchy. Russian Empire in 1914. Tsar Nicholas II, he ruled the Russia in 1914 and its empire. So besides the territory around the Moscow, Russian Empire included Finland, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, and also parts of the Poland, Ukraine and Belarus. It stretched to the Pacific and Central Asian states as well as Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. The majority religion was Russian Orthodox Christianity, which was grown out of Greek Orthodox Church. But the empire also included Catholics, Protestants, Muslims and Buddhists. In this map we see the Russian and Soviet expansion from the 14th century. Economy and society. Factories were set up in 1890s when Russian railway network was extended and foreign investment in the industry increased. Coal production was doubled and production of iron and steel output they quadrupled. Most of the industries were the private property of industrialists. Government supervised large factories to ensure minimum wages and limited hours of work. Workers were a divided social group. Peasants cultivated most of the land. Russian peasants were different from the other European peasants in another way. They pooled their land together periodically and their commune divided it according to the needs of individual families. Socialism in Russia. Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party. This was founded in 1898 by the socialists who respected the Marx ideas. Socialists were active in the countryside through the late 19th century. They formed the Socialist Revolutionary Party in 1900. This party struggled for peasants' their rights and demanded that land belonging to the nobles to be transferred to the peasants. Party was divided over the strategy of organization. Vladimir Lenin thought that in a repressive society like Tsarist Russia, the party should be disciplined and should control the number and quality of its members. During the 1905 revolution, the Tsar allowed the creation of an elected consultative parliament or Duma. But the Tsar dismissed the first Duma within the 75 days and re-elected the second Duma within the 3 months. He did not want any questioning of his authority or any reduction of this power. He changed the voting laws and packed the third Duma with conservative politicians. Liberals and revolutionaries were kept out. First World War and the Russian Empire. In 1914, war broke out between two European alliances, Germany, Austria, Turkey, France, Britain and Russia. Each country had a global empire and the war was fought outside Europe as well as inside Europe, and this was known as the First World War. The war had severe impact on the industry. Russia's own industries were very few in number and the country was cut off from other suppliers of industrial goods by the German control of the Baltic Sea. By 1916, the railway lines also began to break down. So due to this there was labor shortage and small workshops producing essential goods they were shut down. Large Large supply of grains they were sent to feed the army. For the people in the cities, bread, flour became very scarce. The February Revolution in the Petrograd. In February 1917, food shortage was deeply affected by the workers' quarters. Food shortages were deeply felt in the workers' quarters. Winter was very cold. There was exceptional frost and heavy snow. On 22nd February, a lockout took place at a factory on the right bank. The next day, workers in 50 factories they called a strike in sympathy, and in many factories, women led the way to the strikes, and this came to be known as International Women's Day. On 25th February Sunday, the government suspended the Duma. Streets thronged with people raising slogans about bread, wages, better hours and democracy. Government tried to control the situation and called out the cavalry. By that evening, soldiers and striking workers they had gathered to form a Soviet or council in the same building as the Duma met, and this was called the Petrograd Soviet. Petrograd had led the February Revolution that brought down the monarchy in the year 1917 and in the month of February. After February, in April 1917, the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin he returned to Russia from his exile. He and the Bolsheviks they opposed the war since 1914. Now he felt that it was time for the Soviets to take over the power. He declared that the war is brought to a close, land to be transferred to the peasants and banks to be nationalized. So there were three demands from the Lenin's April thesis. In June, about 500 Soviets sent representatives to the All Russian Congress of Soviets. As the provisional government saw its power reduce and Bolsheviks' influence grow, it decided to take stern measures against the spreading discontent, and it resisted attempts by the workers to run the factories and began arresting the leaders. Encouraged by the socialist revolutionaries, peasants seized land between July and September 1917. The Revolution of October 1917. On 16th October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and also the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of the power. So, a military revolutionary committee was appointed by the Soviet Union under Leon Trotsky to organize the seizure, and the date of the event was kept as a secret. But the conflict between the provisional government and the Bolsheviks grew. Lenin feared that the provisional government would set up a dictatorship. At a meeting of the All Russian Congress of Soviets in Petrograd, the majority people approved the Bolshevik action. Uprising took place in other cities. There was heavy fighting, especially in the Moscow, but by December, the Bolsheviks controlled the Moscow-Petrograd area. What changed after October? In the year 1918, month of March, despite opposition by their political allies, the Bolsheviks made peace with Germany at the Brest-Litovsk. In the years that followed, the Bolsheviks became the only party to participate in the elections to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which became the parliament of the country. Russia became a one-party state. Trade unions were kept under the party control. Secret police called Cheka, first and then later known as OGPU and NKVD. They punished those who criticized the Bolsheviks. After October 1917, this led to the experiments of art and architecture. Many became disillusioned because of the censorship the party encouraged. The Civil War. When the Bolsheviks ordered land redistribution, the Russian army began to break up. Soldiers, peasants, they wished to go home for the redistribution and deserted. Non-Bolshevik socialists, liberals, and supporters of autocracy, they condemned the Bolshevik uprising. During 1918 and 1919, the Greens, known as socialist revolutionaries, and Whites, pro-Tsarists, they controlled most of the Russian Empire. They were backed by the French, American, British, and Japanese troops. All these forces who were worried at the growth of socialism in Russia. So as these troops and Bolsheviks fought a civil war, looting, banditry and famine, all these became very common. So in this image we see a civil war happening. In Kivia in Central Asia, the Bolshevik colonists brutally they massacred the local nationalists in the name of defending socialism, and in this situation many were confused about what Bolshevik government represented. Making a socialist society, centralized planning led to economic growth. Industrial production increased between 1929 and 1933 by 100%. In the case of oil, coal and steel, new factories also came into the being. An extended schooling system was developed. Arrangements were made for the factory workers and peasants to enter the universities. Creches were established in the factories for the children of the women workers. Cheap public health care was provided. Model living quarters were also set up for the workers. The effect of all these was uneven, though since government resources were limited. Stalinism and collectivization. Stalin, who headed the party after the death of Lenin, he introduced firm emergency measures. He believed that rich peasants, traders in the countryside, they were holding stocks in the hope of higher prices. Speculation had to be stopped and supplies had to be confiscated. From 1929, the party forced all the peasants to cultivate in collective farms known as kolkhozs. The bulk of the land and implements they were transferred to the ownership of collective farms. Peasants worked on the land and kolkhoz profit was shared. Enraged peasants they resisted the authorities and destroyed their livestock. Between 1929 and 1931, number of the cattle fell by one-third. Those who resisted collectivization, they were severely punished. Many were deported and exiled. Global influence of the Russian Revolution and the USSR. Existing socialist parties in Europe did not wholly approve the way the Bolsheviks took the power and kept it. Many non-Russians from outside the USSR, they participated in the Conference of Peoples of East. In the year 1920, and also the Bolshevik founded Comintern, an international union of pro-Bolshevik socialist parties. Some received education in the USSR's Communist University of the Workers of the East. By the time of the outbreak of the Second World War, the USSR has given socialism a global face and world stature. By the end of 20th century, the international reputation of the USSR as a socialist country has declined, though it was recognized that socialist ideas still enjoyed respect among its people. But in each country, the ideas of socialism were rethought in a variety of different ways.